Hi everyone, so let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the webinar Storytelling for Business. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me. Now, just a couple of things before I launch into the webinar. I won't be able to answer any questions during the webinar. The reason being that I'm on my own at the moment. I was going to have somebody helping me field questions, but unfortunately that didn't materialize. But hopefully we'll have time at the end to answer some questions. Secondly, the second thing is that I am at home, and if there are any noises coming from around me and from outside, I apologize for that. It's beyond my control. So I'm going to give you some introductions, proper introductions in a moment. But before that, I just want to start with a story. So the name of my organization is Learning Alive, and we do education and training in disadvantaged areas in the township with teenagers from low income groups. And what's happening at the moment is that I'm very concerned about them, because they are at home and they don't have any access to any schooling, and because they're from lower income groups, they don't have the connection, they don't have the data to get online learning, so they don't have a backup in terms of homeschooling. So a few months ago, I bought them a book, and I handed this book out. I didn't know whether it was a good idea because it's a very highbrow book, it's an adult book, but it's a book that changed my life. So I took a chance and I thought, will they read it? Will they get into it? Is it teen friendly? So I took a chance and I handed this book out to them. Then a few days ago, one of these students contacted me on WhatsApp, and he said, "Hi ma'am, how you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, Prince." And Prince is a marvelous boy. And he is, very diligent, very hardworking, very serious young man. He's 15 years old. I said, "How are you doing, Prince? Are you getting on with stuff?" And he said, "Ma'am, you know what? I'm reading that book you gave me, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People." And he said to me in his serious little voice, "I really do think it's giving me a mastery for life." So I was it was just a joyful moment. I was absolutely overjoyed, because the books that I handed out were being used by the kids, and they had a backup, at least that some of them had a backup while they're not at school. So why am I telling you this story? Well, the question I want to ask that relates to this story is, why do people make purchasing decisions? Why do people actually decide to buy things? So let's just think back now to the story that I did and have that question in mind. People make purchasing decisions because, number one, they understand what you're selling. They understand the goods or the services or products you're selling. Number two, I think people make purchasing decisions because they trust you. Trust is a very big part of purchasing decisions. And number three, they buy something for you if it's fixing a pain or giving a gain. So they buy something for you if it's going to solve a problem, or perhaps if it enhances some aspect of their lives. And lastly, I think that people buy things for you if they like you. Okay, so let's just think back to that story I just told about Prince. Did you understand what I was selling from that story? Well, I think so, because I mentioned to you that I work in education, and I deliver education in the townships. Did it build up a feeling of trust? Well, I think it did, because I told you that I was giving resources. The kids were getting resources from me to help education. And we know that doesn't always happen. We know they don't always get textbooks, but it built up a sense of trust. Nextly, was I fixing a pain or giving a gain? Well, I definitely was, because he had access to education when he desperately needed it. And that tells you that that's what we do in Learning Alive. And lastly, did it make me likable? Well, I sincerely hope so, because I told you that I was concerned and I was worried about my learners. So that raises my likability. So all of those things that help people make purchasing decisions were covered in that little story I told you. But did I do a sales pitch? No, I didn't. It was just one 60-second story that had so much in it. And that is the subject of my webinar today. So I'm going to be giving you some great tips coming up and how you can build great stories that have the same kind of impact. But as promised, here's some introductions. So this is me. My name is Anne-Marie Olafua, and I am the Director of Learning Alive. We are an education and training organisation. I have over 20 years of experience in the education and training sector. I am a career teacher to my bones. I love teaching. It's what I always wanted to do. But I've also got extensive experience in presentation skills training in corporate sectors and in higher education. So I'm hoping that helps you realise that you're in good hands this evening. So I see that some of you are raising your hands. As I said, I won't be able to answer any questions because I am on my own at the moment. So I don't have anybody to back up the questions that you're asking. So I'm just going to plow on. What are we going to be covering in this webinar? Well, in this webinar, I'm going to be telling you why storytelling is an essential way to get and convert more referrals, and also how it can help you take your presentations to the next level. I'm passionate about storytelling, the power of it, and I'm going to be sharing that with you. But also, I'm going to be helping you find where to get great stories for your business. So that's what's coming up in the webinar. So let's crack on right now. So let's take a look at what's happening at the moment. We all know why working online is becoming so important. At this moment in time, the way that we're working has changed. We have to find a new way of working. Now, there's a good chance that these new ways of working, more online interfaces, is going to last even after the current situation has come to an end. I believe that this new way of working will continue. But it presents a great opportunity for us because now we have the online interface, we have new ways to connect and new ways to actually reach out and cross that digital divide. So we cannot perhaps do what we normally did, which was go to meetings with our business partners and shake hands. And in my chapter, in B&I the Verve, yay, B&I the Verve, we like to embrace each other because we're very close. B&I is a powerful networking organization, Business Network International, which you can Google. But we can't meet in person, so we don't have that physical contact anymore. But what do we have to replace that? We have words. And words, as we know, are incredibly powerful, especially if we learn to use them well and use them effectively. That's what we're going to be looking at today. So why storytelling? Well, I love storytelling. Life is full of stories. We grew up with stories, didn't we? I'm sure if I asked you, did you ever have stories read to you by your parents? Did you have story time at school that you enjoyed? There's something magical and whimsical about stories, and stories actually help us understand so much about life because stories teach us things. For example, the stories that are in the Bible actually give us guidance for life. We have stories of real life heroes like Nelson Mandela, for example. When we tell his story, we don't talk about facts and dates. We talk about the story, the events that happened to him as a story, because it has more impact. And we also have great family stories. Everybody has family stories, traditional stories, anecdotes, funny stories, maybe sad stories, inspiring stories, but they are everywhere. So I'm sure if I asked you right now, can you think of a family anecdote? I'm sure some of you will have some great things that pop to mind. These are all stories, and they show why stories are everywhere. So in this webinar, what I'm going to ask you to do is to look out for these key tips. There's a few, it's only half an hour today, but these, if you have to take away anything, if you don't remember anything as I'm saying, just try and remember these key tips. And here's the first one. If you're struggling with the idea of storytelling, remember that you don't need any special skills or training to do it. You don't need to have public speaking training. You don't have to take a course. All you need is a good memory and a little confidence, and it will come naturally to you. The more you practice, the more it will flow, and you will find that you can do it very, very easily. And yes, you can do it in a business setting. Everyone loves a good story, and everybody will be on your side when you start telling a story. So that's the first key tip I want you to remember. Going on to why storytelling. So the name of this webinar is Storytelling for Business. So we're going to talk about why storytelling for business now. Our brains are actually wired to remember facts, to remember stories, not facts. They're not wired to remember lots of numbers or technical information. That stays in our brain. It's not retained in our brains for very long before it just flows away. But stories actually do stay in our brains because it's how we're wired to remember things. And there's a very good study that actually proves this. In Stanford Business School, they did a sales pitch exercise with the students. And what happened is they got the students to do a sales pitch. And they said, okay, one of you, and they kept it a secret, one of you is going to focus on stories in your sales pitch. And the rest of you are going to do the traditional sales pitch, which is just focusing on goods and services and so forth. Afterwards, they asked the audience, what can you remember? How much of this sales pitch can you remember? And here's the statistics that came out. Only 5% of the audience remembered the facts, and 63% of them remembered the story. Now, that is something that's a very powerful fact to remember when you're thinking about storytelling for business. So that brings me to my next key tip. Remember that stories are ideally suited for business because they make sales presentations much more memorable. Facts tell, but stories sell. A lot of the big brands like Apple, like Nike, they're moving away in their TV adverts from telling what they can do with their goods and services, their cars and their computers, and they're talking about motivation. They're talking about stories. It's something that's catching on, and it's something that you need to get on board with. So let's carry on looking at how you can do that. So we've looked at why storytelling works well in life, but also especially in a business context. So it's all very well saying, yes, okay, it works, but where can you find these great stories? So what's coming up next is I'm going to give you some tips on the best types of stories and where to find them. So finding great stories. Now, this is something very interesting that I want you to think about. When you think about going back to what makes people buy, what actually drives a purchasing decision, we talked about something very important. We talked about solving a problem. We talked about giving a gain or taking away a pain. Now, here's a very important fact. That is exactly the same core ingredient to all great stories. A lot of great stories, the best stories, have the element of overcoming a challenge or solving a problem. And they also have the element of succeeding despite the odds. So I'm going to ask you all to think about something right now. Think about your favorite film or the favorite book that you've read, something that made a big impact on you. How many of those involved solving a problem? Whether it was overcoming a conflict from within the character or whether it's a conflict from outside, all the great films and books involve solving a problem. And it's exactly the same thing that involves making a purchasing decision, fixing a pain or giving a gain. So this is where you start to actually think about finding your stories. I want you to scan your life and especially the things that you've done in your businesses. Was there a time where you overcame a challenge? Was there a time where you solved a problem? And was there a time where you succeeded despite the odds, even with people telling you this isn't going to work? That's a good place to find your first stories. Now you might say, well, I'm an accountant, okay? I don't have adventurous stories to tell. Depends on how you think of it. An accountant friend of mine told me that she had an extremely difficult customer, very angry customer, shouting, making serious complaints, causing all sorts of problems, but she turned it around by giving her a great service, by coming up with a solution. And then after a few days of working with her, she changed. That customer became a big fan. That customer was very, very, very pleased. That is a story of overcoming a challenge or solving a problem. Another story is perhaps, I've got one, a very fantastic plumber in my chapter came out to me when I had a flood in my kitchen. My washing machine was flooding. I called him, he was there in 20 minutes. I was very distressed because it was ruining the carpets and the neighbours downstairs were screaming at me. He was there in 20 minutes. He fixed the problem. On a Saturday, he came out, by the way, and he cleaned up after himself. So if you're a plumber or somebody in a service industry, you've all got stories like that. It's what makes you proud, and it's what makes you good. Those are where you find great stories. A next place to find great stories is finding your why. Everybody in business has a why, especially entrepreneurs. Why are they in it? How did they start it? That is a great place to start finding a story. Why do you do what you do? Another story for you. I've got a friend who, as a child, he had extremely bad dyslexia. He was failing at school. His teachers had written him off. He was bullied. He hated school. He couldn't pass any of his exams. But then he discovered that he had a gift for fixing computers. And through that, he understood it doesn't matter if I can read or write particularly well, I can do this. And it changed him in so many ways because it was a breakthrough in his confidence. And he carries that through into his work. Imagine if you're telling that story. No, it doesn't necessarily have to come from your business life. That's a childhood story that leads to your why you're in this business. But it still works to help people trust you and want to partner with you in making those pertinent purchasing decisions. Scan your life. Think about your why, your passion, and drive that through into your storytelling about how you started your business. So time for another key tip. Where's the best place to find stories? Well, we've talked about it. Scan your personal and business life for events that show why you give a great service or why you give great customer care. Your proudest moments, these are all great stories. Take a moment to think. You will find them, I promise you, and then you can channel these into presentations and sales pitches. And as we said, you will be able to take them to the next level. So we're coming close to the end now. I'm just going to tell you about some of the future webinars and videos that I'm going to be putting together. One is the 60-second story. Now in BNI, we have to stand up every week and give a presentation about what we do so that people can go out and find referrals for us. How do we do that in a short, compact space of time, but still keep the impact? One of my webinars, my next webinar, is going to be the 60-second story, the classic elevator pitch. The next one is storytelling while networking. So when we actually do get to be out and about again and we're mingling, how do you slip a story in so that it's casual, but it's natural, you're just mingling, having a cup of coffee, shaking hands. How can you slip that story in so it still works? I'm going to be telling you how to do that. And lastly, one that I get a lot of requests for, storytelling for business. Stories that sell. What are the best stories that actually go out and make people make that purchasing decision or want to partner with you? It's stories combined with that essential call to action. So that's a great session that you don't want to miss. So after this webinar, I beg your pardon, I'm going to be sending a recording so that you can watch it all again. But also, here's a bit of homework for you coming from the teacher. I'm going to give you a planning sheet, free of charge planning sheet. And I want you to sit down with that planning sheet and think about when you overcame a problem, when you succeeded despite the odds in your business life. Think about your why. Why do you do what you do? And make some notes. And here's part of the offer. I will help you put together these stories using the planning sheet. If you email me, if you call me, I will give you that service absolutely free of charge. I will work with you to actually start putting together your first few stories that you can start channeling into your presentations and pitches. Don't be shy, give me a call or drop me a line. So now let's just summarize. It's always good to summarize so that we can remember what we've learned. So the first one of these key tips, you don't need any special training. You don't need to have public speaking skills, etc., etc. All you need is a good memory and a little confidence. Give it a go and you'll find that it comes naturally. There's stories everywhere. Stories are for life. The second key tip, stories are suited to business because they drive sales, because it helps us Remember, stories are memorable. They're more memorable than facts and figures. So they are suited to business because they help people take action based on what you're selling them. Lastly, where's the best place to find stories? The best place to find stories is you, your life, your business experiences. You are a treasure trove of great stories. Use the planning sheet that I'm going to send you to sit down and start finding those great stories and start sharing them. And finishing up, hopefully we're going to have, I've allowed a few minutes for questions. There's a quote from Steve Jobs, and it says, "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come." Now, he was a great storyteller, as you know, and he actually took that into the heart of what he did to make Apple the greatest success that it is right now. Say, so let's see. Beyond this, I'm not going to disappear into the ether. I'm sending my contact details. You can email me your questions at annie@learningalive.co.za. And you can also call me or WhatsApp me. I'm very good at answering questions on WhatsApp. So it's my phone number is 076 358 2634. I'm going to send this to you as well. So if you have any other questions, and don't forget, if you need me to help you with your planning sheet so that you can start finding your great stories, I will actually do that with absolute pleasure. Help you get out there and go and start telling stories, convincing people, getting sales, getting referrals, converting those referrals. It's all within your grasp if you just take the leap, find a little bit of confidence and start telling stories. So that's it. That's all for now. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you at the next webinar.